Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We welcome you to our event, which is part of the collaborative efforts undertaken by the Technical University of Crete with leading international and national institutions to promote its modern scientific achievements, enhance its educational work, and support its ongoing outreach and research integration with society. As an academic institution that nurtures the sciences of an engineer, Technical University of Crete seeks to connect cutting-edge research with practical applications in the environment and the daily lives of people in order to improve the overall quality of life. Before we begin, we would like to inform you that this event will be recorded on video, broadcasted live, and photographs will be taken. The digital content will be made available on the university's website and official channels. The Technical University of Crete will also promote the event on social media and in newsletters. Today, we have the honor and pleasure of welcoming two distinguished scientists who have made significant contributions to humanity's efforts to explore space and through it understand human nature and our planet Earth. We are pleased to introduce NASA astronaut Dr. Stanley J. Love and neuroscientist with expertise in space sciences, Dr. Jancy McPhee. Dr. Love and Dr. McPhee, welcome. Our event will begin with a welcome speech from the rector of the Technical University of Crete, Professor Michael Zervakis, and an introduction by the rector of the two distinguished scientists. Professor Zervakis, the floor is yours.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, φίλοι, αγαπητοί φοιτητές και νεότεροι φοιτητές, είναι πολύ μεγάλη τιμή να έχουμε τους δύο επισκέπτες μας και θα μου επιτρέψετε να μιλήσω λίγο στα αγγλικά. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, dear students, it is my great honor to have our two distinguished guests over here, Dr. Jancy McPhee and Dr. Stanley Love, who come from NASA in order to bring us some information and enlighten us on the aspects of the space and the relationship to earth sciences and the relationship to the society. So at the Technical University of Crete, we are a purely technological institution. We develop science out of the ingenuity of the humans. And I think this relates very well to what is happening in the space, where ingenuity has the first position, but also human the human let's say development in the engineering has a lot to do also with arts, and relates and blends very well with arts, because the science of engineering relates and simulates arts. For example, if you are making let's say human models, then this is exactly what you simulate in arts. If you try to model even the molecules, this relates to motion in art. So essentially, what we're doing over here has a lot of relationship with both our colleagues, and we are very glad to have them, both of them, here in order to talk about the new developments in NASA, and also try to also show them what we are doing over here at the Technical University of Crete, and essentially promote the work that you are doing, that you as students and researchers are doing here, and give us another boost that whatever we can dream might be possible to become reality. So thank you very much for being here with us and giving us your knowledge on these exciting missions that you are developing. So let me introduce our two colleagues. Dr. Jancy McPhee has a Bachelor of Arts in Neurobiology and Behavior from Cornell University and a PhD in Biophysics from Brandeis University. She was a cellular and molecular neuroscience researcher and lecturer in academia for 17 years. Currently, she works as Associate Chief Scientist of NASA Human Research Program, where she develops space science strategies that span physiological disciplines, space missions, and international and commercial partners. Since 2010, she has also been developing motivating and novel ways to enhance space education and communication, foster science and technology innovation, and promote global collaboration to solve hard challenges in space and on Earth. Through her non-profit SciArt exchange, her team offers a variety of global science integrated with art activities and training to inspire and prepare the world for the future of space exploration. So far, the non-profit programs have engaged over 15,000 participants in 68 countries, and over 4.5 million participants have viewed multimedia artwork displays and performances locally, worldwide, in person. Welcome, Dr. McPhee, and thank you very much. Let me also introduce at the same time Dr. Stanley Love, who holds a Bachelor of Science in Physics from Harvey Mudd College and a Master of Science and PhD in Astronomy from the University of Washington. Selected as an astronaut in 1998, Dr. Love flew in space in 2008 on Space Shuttle Atlantis for mission STS-122, a 13-day flight that delivered the ESA Columbus module to the space station. His duties included 2 spacewalks totaling over 15 hours of EVA time. Dr. Love served as spacecraft communicator, Capcom, for 24 shuttle and state missions, and has been the crew representative for SLS, Orion, and Gateway. He has participated in numerous terrestrial spaceflight analog expeditions, including 2 field sessions in Antarctica. He currently serves as Deputy Chief of the Astronaut Office's Rapid Prototyping Laboratory, developing cockpit displays and controls for Orion, Gateway, and lunar vehicles. He is also the lead Capcom for Artemis II, training with the crew and flight control team for the next human flight for the moon. Welcome, Dr. Love, and thank you very much for being here.
Professor Zervakis, thank you very much. Our event will continue with a presentation by Dr. Jancy McPhee, titled Exploring the Universe Through Science, Technology, and the Arts. Following the presentation, Dr. McPhee will be open to questions from the audience.
Let's do one of those mic checks. Can you hear me, everyone? Excellent. Over there, over here, and over there. Awesome. I'm so excited about that. So first of all, good morning to the Technical University of Crete. It is my incredible privilege to be here and see you. And we were able to talk to many of you yesterday, and I look forward to meeting many more of you later today. So thank you so much for giving us your time. I appreciate that very much. So as my esteemed colleagues have mentioned, my name is Jancy McPhee, and I am going to talk to you today about a little bit about what I know about what is happening in space exploration right now, some of the benefits to Earth of the work that we're doing in space, but also a lot of the challenges that we still have in space, and actually some of them you'll find hauntingly familiar to some of the challenges that all of you are working on Earth. And then hopefully convince you that there is power in integrating the arts with space, science, and technology to help answer and address some of the unknowns and the challenges as well. So I know that you've already heard my bio and my description, but let me take you back a couple of decades and kind of underscore a little bit of what was already said. I was that kid who loved science because I had wonderful teachers as a child, but I grew up in a home that was full of literature and music, and I was taken to the museums to explore art. So I had a tremendous appreciation for the arts, even starting very, very young. And all of my hobbies were in music and theater. If you haven't figured it out already, I'm a little dramatic. So that I've always had both elements in my life. So when I got to college, I wasn't quite sure which way to go. I was at a crossroads. I love science, but if I went down the science path, what was I going to miss down the arts path? And in the United States, you have a tendency to really only be able to study either or. It takes some effort to be able to study both and engage in both. So I finally decided that I would become a neuroscientist. Because what is a neuroscientist? But that is someone who studies the biology of how humans think and create and have emotions and move. So to me, that was the best integration of many of my interests and my skills. And I did, as you heard, do 17 years of cellular and molecular neuroscience in the laboratory. But then I had the opportunity to go work in space life sciences. And my job was to bring together people who come from different countries, also people across commercial entities and the space agency, and also people with different interests in different types of biology and in different space missions. So my job was the science strategy and the partnerships to help us answer some of the unknowns in space exploration. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about where are we going in space and who's going and why are we taking the time and the resources to do that. And I know that many of you already know that we have an International Space Station, and we have for more than 20 years, about 400 kilometers from the surface of the Earth, and that it is an international collaboration between the Japanese, the Canadians, the US, the Europeans, and the Russians. But maybe you know a little bit less about the fact that we are now returning to the moon and then onward to Mars. And these are some of our near-term and very real targets for what we're doing in space. So let me tell you a little bit more about each of those different kinds of space exploration that we're working towards, the missions. So as I mentioned, you already know there's an International Space Station, and there has been for a very long time. But maybe you don't really appreciate how many commercial space companies, so these are not space agencies, but these are private companies, are also starting to take people to prepare to live and work in low Earth orbit around the planet. And you've already heard about companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX taking up very small numbers of people to tag space. But SpaceX has also done week-long orbits around space, bringing non-astronauts up to live and work and do research. And to me, it's very exciting that the people who are going into space right now are also very interested in contributing to the future of space exploration. And many of them are willing to be test subjects for biomedical research as well, including those who come to visit the ISS but brought up by commercial companies. Maybe you don't know that the ISS will be going away fairly soon, just in the early 2030s, if we're lucky. But we are already working with commercial companies that want to build new space stations that will orbit the planet and provide places where we can live and work and continue to do research. And many of these companies you've already heard about: Axiom, Blue Origin, NanoRacks, Sierra Nevada. But also, scientifically, it's very exciting that some of these space stations are going to do things that we have never been able to do before, which is to spin the station. There is a company coming up right now called VAST that hopes to spin the entire station to create an artificial gravity so that astronauts can live and work in space. And up until now, we have only seen that in books and movies. So it's a really exciting, growing time in low Earth orbit, and it's not just space agencies, the ones that you've heard of, but also space companies. But we are also going to the moon, Mars, and beyond. And it's not just NASA and the United States. There are many countries around the world that are sending, at this point, largely robotic satellites and rovers, because that's what you do in the early phases of space exploration. You don't send the people. The people are very difficult to keep alive in space, and you don't want to mess up. So you send your robots first. So we have our rovers and our stations and our orbiters, and there are many countries getting engaged. You see just a couple of them listed here. We've got colleagues from Japan and various places in Europe. Our Russian colleagues, the Chinese are working in space. The Indian Space Research Organization just had a recent victory landing on the moon. Our colleagues in the United Arab Emirates are really preparing a lot to get humans into space as well, including developing very complicated Earth simulations where they can do a little study about what we might expect when we go to Mars. But maybe some of you are asking that question that we always get asked. With so much going on Earth, why are we spending time and resources going to space? And it's an excellent question. And I think perhaps some of the challenge is that we need to do a better job communicating to everyone the value of what we get through space exploration. And I know that many of you that we spoke to yesterday are interested in climate change. So one of the things that is happening in space is all of the imaging that we're doing of the planet Earth, of our home, which is helping us to track wildfires and pollution and look at the changes in the Earth and relay those data to the people who are measuring it and want to make a difference and stop some of the changes that we're seeing. There's also, of course, many of you know that we have very valuable communication systems that are supported by objects orbiting in space. And also, as I mentioned, there's huge development going on for the future of space exploration, starting first with that growing economy in low Earth orbit. And there will be jobs. There will be people helping to develop the technologies, answering the scientific questions. There will be people needed to live and work in space, to work on the planetary surfaces, to help us mine resources that are found on the moon or on Mars and create stations that we can use to launch and go further into space. There's going to be lots of jobs. And also another thing that we get from space, of course, is education and inspiration. There are a lot of emerging countries that are actually using the future of space exploration as a reason to encourage their children to learn about science and technology and engineering and to get their countries really engaged in contributing to this incredible future that we hope to do together as humanity. But this picture in particular is something that reminds us about the value of the inspiration of space. And this is actually an Apollo image. It's called Earthrise. And this is a very important picture because we have heard reported from many astronauts that seeing the entire Earth all as one has been an amazing, life-changing event that has made them realize that, it's obvious, but there are no boundaries actually on the planet, that we really are the human race living and working on the planet Earth. We make those boundaries, and that we can work collaboratively to save our precious planet, but also to explore further in space. And this is so important that there are many new commercial companies working on how do we bring more people just high enough into space, not always with space vehicles, but sometimes high altitude balloons, just so they can see the Earth in its entirety and have this transformational experience. Space is also very much about international collaboration and cooperation, and that is one of the important reasons why we are here to talk to you, is to make sure that you understand that the future of space is about you. It's not just about NASA. And I will talk some more about that. You probably all know about various spin-off technologies that affect your lives, that come from the challenges that we've already had to solve in order to live and work in space, like your beloved cell phone. I see many of you are holding it up right now, or perhaps a little distracted. But that beloved piece of equipment is, at least some of the aspects are courtesy of the advances we've made in space. But there's also fire-retardant clothing for firefighters, freeze-dried foods, cordless technologies. There are a lot of things that you may not even realize. There have been advances over the decades that have led to things that you use every day. And we also anticipate a lot of future spin-off technologies. Energy is a very important thing in space, and we have to figure out how to create and store energy as much as we can as we move further and longer into space. Our food systems also have to be adjusted. We will learn about things like vertical plant growth, how to use hydroponics. All of these things may be supporting life here on the Earth. I know that the United Arab Emirates has a big focus on agriculture because they have limited territory in which they can grow food. So one of their interests in space is what can they learn to help advance space and the growth of plants in space, but also help their own cities to grow sufficient food with very limited fertile ground. And of course, science. We're all here about science and technology, right? So we mentioned some of the technologies, but we have also learned a tremendous amount about how human beings work as we're trying to understand what space does to humans and how we can protect them. And of course, one of the main reasons we're going into space is to see if there is any life out there. And so there's a lot of knowledge that we want to pursue. And of course, everything we learn about our solar system, about our planet, about our neighboring planets and beyond can hopefully also help us to understand how we might live and work in other places or protect the planet that we have, including from damaging things like asteroids. I don't think anyone in this room wants to go the way of the dinosaurs. So let's talk a little bit about the moon. NASA's program is called Artemis. It used to be Apollo decades ago. Now it's the twin, Artemis. I think all of you can relate to that. I've already seen some thumbs up from some people in the audience. So yes, we all appreciate that. And we are going to the moon to get a deeper understanding of how to live and work on other planetary surfaces. And it's going to look different this time. I think that all of us who can remember landing on the moon felt that that was an incredible moment in human history, and it was. And Artemis will also be, the series of missions will also be an incredible moment for the human race, and we're going together as the international community. There will be men and women and people of different races that will be going to the moon. It is not just that same old person that went in the past. And as I mentioned, it's an international activity. There is something called the Artemis Accords, and 28 countries from around the world have signed up to be part of the Artemis Accords. And one of the most important things about the Artemis Accords is to underscore the peaceful cooperation and collaboration in space. That is the message. That is what we are trying to do for the future of space exploration, to engage everyone as much as possible and to do so to collectively as humanity. And there's going to be a lot of science and technology that's going to happen on these moon missions. We didn't achieve quite as much science in the Apollo missions. We were just really excited to get there in the first place, and those missions were short. The Artemis missions will be longer, and we will be working in many different fields of science, whether they're planetary science, we're also going to do human and space biology science. We're going to be very interested in understanding the evolution of our solar system and what sorts of things bombard the surfaces of the moon and our planet, and also developing technologies that will allow us to live and work more in space and also enable us to get to Mars. So as was mentioned in my introduction, my particular interest in space flight and space exploration is the human space exploration. All of my work in that field of science has been about how do we understand how to protect the astronauts' health while they are living and working in space, but also how can we ensure that they can carry out the missions. These are precious and expensive and valuable moments, and we want to be sure that the astronaut is taken care of, but also able to do all that science that we talked about. So from the human perspective, we consider space has 5 things, 5 hazards that are most serious to the health and welfare and productivity of humans. The first is radiation. That's probably the first thing that all of you thought about. But mostly you're thinking about solar flares. Maybe you didn't realize that there's also a constant bath of radiation called galactic cosmic radiation. And that's actually the one that we, the human research community, worry about the most. It's just constantly bombarding the humans. It's different from what we're used to when we study radiation here on Earth. And the solar flares, you can predict those and shield yourself from those, so those are less of a challenge. But this constant bath has potential long-term health effects that we worry about, and I'll list a few of those. Another really important thing is altered gravity. So here you are living, working, and enjoying having 1 g of gravity here on Earth. When we're orbiting, we effectively have 0 g of gravity. And as we mentioned, we've been working in 0 g situations on the International Space Station for decades. So we have some understanding of what happens to the human body as it adapts to being in a 0 g environment. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what we know almost nothing about is what happens in between 0 and 1. And since we're scientists and engineers in the room, it's important to have some data points in between 0 and 1, because you don't know if the response is a straight line or it's exponential with a big dip. We know very little except for those couple of days from Apollo. Can you still hear me? Okay. So the gravity we anticipate on the moon is 1/6 g, and on the moon it's 3/8 g. And we need to understand the long-term effects of living and working at these intermediate g effects as well. Also, very near and dear to all of your hearts is space exploration means living in a hostile, closed environment. And after speaking with many of you yesterday, I know that you're very interested in ecosystems, whether it's the planet's ecosystem or it's a local ecosystem. But a lot of the questions that you're interested in are also important for our spacecrafts and our habitats and all of that. Also, the human aspect of being isolated and confined is something that we are very concerned about. How do you spend perhaps 2 or 3 years in a small space with 3 or 4 or 5 other people and not end up killing each other. So I know from my family that we have about an 8-day limit, and then we need a couple of hours on our own. Well, you're not really going to get a whole lot of that unless you put on your blinders and you find a secret corner. But it's very important for us to figure out not just how to survive, but also to thrive in space and to be able to take care of our own mental health. And as we spend more and more time, we're also going to need diversions, entertainment, and skills to respect each other, our team members. If somebody says, I need a little time alone, you give them their time alone. So the teaming and the isolation, the confinement is a real problem. And as we go further in space, it's also going to be harder to talk back home, to ask questions, to speak to your family, or any of that. The communication delay is much longer. And that is one of the challenges of going further and further from Earth. So distance from Earth is the other thing that creates a lot of technical challenges. There won't be a lot of support. There won't be fresh fruit being brought up periodically. Distance from Earth is another major hazard. And this is a very old picture, and it's not my favorite picture, but it gives me the reminder to talk to you a little bit about at least one of those 5 hazards, which is the changes in gravity. So when you go from a 1G environment to a 0G environment, you offload your lower body, and all of your fluid goes headward because it's not being pulled down. You're also unloading your bones and your muscles. And there are changes that are natural adaptation to your environment that occur as a result. Some of those changes are in potentially your eyes, but also your organ systems, your blood systems. Your bones and muscles will deteriorate if you don't do a lot of exercise to keep those bones and muscles strong, because maybe unloading your lower body is fine in 0 gravity, but what about when you land on the planet and now you have more gravity? You're suddenly putting a lot of weight on those bones and muscles, which have naturally gotten less strong because they didn't need to be in 0 gravity. There's also a lot of stress. The closed environments can also challenge your immune system. There's a lot of sensory motor changes. Your inner ear detects gravity. And when you change your gravity environment, you can feel really sick, especially as you shift from one gravity environment to another and back again. Each of those transitions can be extra difficult. So gravity alone is a tremendously important factor. But when you combine all the hazards, these are the top hazards that we worry about the most right now for the human on these future missions. So they're cumulative, and the yellow ones I will talk about a little bit more in the future slide. But some of the questions you might ask yourself is, if we're going to go away for 2 or 3 years, what kinds of medical equipment do we need? We can't bring the entire hospital with us. So we need to be able to use modeling to anticipate what our most likely medical concerns will be, so that we bring those technologies with us for the most likely ones. And of course, they have to be smaller and lighter than they are on Earth. So there's plenty of room for technology development. Hint, hint. Okay, so please, we got to hear about some very interesting biomedical research that your group is doing. Well, now try to make whatever you're working on 1/10 the size, and that would be awesome. So the medical conditions, but not just the technology, but also the processes. Not everybody in the crew is going to be a medical doctor necessarily. And that, given the way the world works, the person who will get sick will probably be the medical doctor. And so now one of the other crew members is going to have to do some complicated diagnostics and treatment of that person. And so they're going to need decision support tools. training, videos, AR, VR, refreshers. Oh yeah, I was trained to do that 3 years ago, but I don't really remember how to use that ultrasound. How do I use it? So the medical conditions are very important. As I mentioned, all these gravity conditions, as we change, they create challenges. But what I didn't mention is that during launch and landing, we can have actually more than 1G as well. And so as we develop our spacecraft and our landers, we have to think about the biological effects of more than 1G on humans as well. So we call that dynamic loads. I mentioned sensory motor challenges. Well, there are also some longer term sensory motor challenges that can cause changes in hand-eye coordination. And so we want to also understand how that works and how we can provide countermeasures to help retrain people in their skills so that they are going to be able to handle both the expected and the unexpected things that are likely to happen. Similar to the medical conditions, we have to have enough drugs to support all of the challenges we see, and enough food. So I know everybody's brain instantly thinks that radiation is our biggest concern, as I mentioned, but actually what we're most worried about right now is how to feed everybody for 3 years. Because we don't have a lot of space, and that food has to stay nutritious and fresh for years. So the medicine that we bring, the food that we bring, supporting nutrition, if you just go away for a week or two, you can eat anything, right? But if you go for 2 or 3 years, you have to have balanced nutrition. And food is also a good psychological factor as well. And it also helps with changes in your immune system. So it's not just the calories. It's much more complicated than that. And then I mentioned that bath of galactic cosmic radiation. We are, of course, worried about the long-term effects of potentially increasing the rate of cancer for astronauts. It also turns out that the brain and the heart are a little extra sensitive, potentially, to radiation, especially combined with the other hazards that we've been talking about. And we are also concerned about changes in vision. There is some decrease in vision with astronauts that are even in low Earth orbit for months, and we don't really understand exactly what causes those changes, and we would like to better understand that and be able to have countermeasures. So how do we address all of these unknowns? The knowledge that we don't have, but also the countermeasures that we haven't yet developed. Well, obviously we do as much as we can on the planet as possible, because it is very expensive to go to space, especially with humans. So we have lots of simulations here on Earth that we use to try to answer some of these questions. And then we do as much as we can on the International Space Station or in those, week-long orbiting trips like SpaceX is starting to do. We actually have collaborations with SpaceX since we share interests in research, and so we can actually do some NASA experiments on those SpaceX flights on the non-astronauts even. So something to think about. And then we are going to the moon, but we're going to use the moon to also understand how to live and work on Mars. And there is actually, it's a little mind-boggling, but there's actually an international movement to use the International Space Station as well as an analog for Mars. So to think about questions we can ask on that. So just to highlight two very human risks that we worry about. One of them is this greater crew autonomy. So I mentioned that we're in these isolated and confined environments, and that we're much further from home. Communication will take a lot longer. There's not going to be a resupply. There's not even necessarily going to be the same options for coming home when something goes wrong, the further and further we get from the planet. So there's a lot of need for autonomy. That includes all of these things we talked about by having just the right medical supplies and the right VR and AR refresher training, but we're going to need decision support tools. We also need really good interfaces between the human and all of the robotic equipment that we have, which may also be another area of interest amongst those of you who are doing research. That's the human systems integration. And that's a very important thing that we're doing a lot of work in trying to understand. And then back to that camping trip that's going to take 2 or 3 years with the same people en route to Mars. We really want to understand how to support the individuals and the teams, give everybody the skills that they need to get along and have their needs met. And we study that on the ground. You'll see listed here. This is a NASA facility called Hera. And it is actually an isolation and confinement facility where they go for 45 days. And they live and work and act as though they were in space. And they have limited food and limited space. And we're addressing a lot of interesting behavioral health and team questions using those environments. But we also take advantage of naturally isolated and confined events on the planet, like when people go to Antarctica. They are already under stressful conditions where they are isolated and confined, and we'll do science of opportunity. So we can't control exactly what they're doing, but we can, for instance, measure their stress hormones and have them keep journals on what they're doing and their impressions along the journey in Antarctica. So now we've talked a lot about the scientific and technical challenges of space exploration and how what we're learning in space is also giving back to Earth, including things like telemedicine techniques and remote learning about the human body. But I think what I need to stress for you is that the challenges of space exploration are not just scientific and technical. There are a lot of other things, and it's true for everything we do here on Earth, because if it engages humans, it's going to be complicated. So that is just a fact of life. But I think that some of the challenges that we face in space and on Earth could be supported if we made a more concerted effort, if we tried harder to enhance our communication, our collaboration, and our creative thinking. And it is that I particularly, the neuroscientist in me who also likes the arts, is particularly interested. And it's even more important now than it ever was, because we're not just sending those traditional astronauts into space. As we mentioned, there are commercial companies who are sending people who are not astronauts into space. We are sending, even as NASA, we are sending different kinds of people into space now than what we used to. And the European Space Agency is even looking to send people with different abilities potentially into space in collaboration with NASA. So the opportunities are expanding. There are more space agencies than there were 20 years ago. There are more space companies. The whole thing is just expanding like crazy. And the opportunities are enormous. And we need to understand what happens not just to the average human, but to each individual human, because we are not engineered, right? We are biological systems, and every one of us has a slightly different genetic makeup. So some of us may be more sensitive to some of those hazards in space than others. And if we could understand not just the collective impact of space, but also the effects on an individual, we can support them as they go on to live and work in space. So where does art and design fit into all of this? So as I mentioned, I'm particularly interested in how we communicate about space and technology, and also how we work together better as a team, how we really open our minds to solve some of the incredible challenges in space exploration and on Earth. And let's start just with the concept of communication. So I think most of us who are growing up in the science and technology world and are educated as all of you are really focused on the how, on the what, actually, mostly focused on the what of science and technology. But we don't always relay to each other and to the public exactly why what we're doing is important and how we're doing it. So it's very important to know your audience and to talk not just about what you're doing, but why it matters. And the arts are very helpful in that regard because the arts help us to tell the story of the why. And why are stories important to humans? We have always used stories to teach and keep our history. And also, again, as the neuroscientist, I'm very interested that listening to stories actually does things to your brain and releases hormones in your body. And it actually helps you to learn and feel personally engaged in whatever someone is talking about if they tell it like a story. Something for you, Costas. And the arts are fabulous at telling the story of space and science and technology, whether it be literature, visual art, films, music. We all know of professional examples. And one of my favorites is the top middle, which is that rotating spacecraft. It's from a movie many of you may not have heard of, which is 2001, A Space Odyssey. But I spent almost a decade of my life studying trying to work with an international collaboration on artificial gravity. And every time they wanted to talk about a rotating spacecraft, they had to go to the movies. They have to, because we have to imagine it before we can make it real. And now, as I mentioned, people are working towards making it real. The arts also really help us to have role models and superheroes. And it's important to visualize yourself in the future of space. It also creates symbols for what we think is the future and what we'd like to see. That first image here is the actual photo of the boot print of Armstrong on the moon. But the next photos tell you what the evolution of exploring the moon will be like. It will not just be men, but it will also be women. And then we will move from the moon to Mars. And in these three images, we're just telling a story right here. I'm also very, very interested in creative thinking. And in a very simplified way from psychology and neuroscience, we know that creative thinking is taking the entire collection of all of your experiences and your knowledge and connecting them in a way that has never been connected before, and then testing those against reality to see if they're useful creative ideas. That last step is very important because it's actually the difference between being crazy and being productive, is that you have to test your idea against reality. But that means that to be creative, you need a very broad experience base. And so this is the beginning of my encouraging everyone to not just study your science and your technology, but to expose yourself to as many different kinds of knowledge and experience as possible. In addition, you have to be actively open to new ideas. And I was very fortunate during my space career to be selected to be engaged in conversations about how does one become innovative. And if nothing else came from those conversations, it always gave me the habit to pause and ask myself, am I being open-minded? And honestly, if you just ask yourself that, you will be amazed how often you realize, no, actually, I'm doing it exactly the same way I have always done it. So what might be some other approaches, other ways to think about a problem and create something? And the last very important ingredient towards creative problem solving is to be motivated. Because being truly creative is hard. And I know many of you already know that because you're already being creative in your environment. But you've got to care. You've got to be passionate. You've got to be motivated because something really creative is not going to be easy, or somebody would have done it already. And of course, communication and creativity are all at the basis of being able to work collectively as a team. And if we're going to bring different kinds of people together to solve our problems in space and on Earth, then we're going to need to have all of these underlying skills and the empathy to respect each other if we approach our problem solving in different ways. What you may not realize, and I think I may have mentioned this at some point today, is that we have already got examples of artists and scientists and technologists working together to create and innovate. But what many of you may not appreciate is that a lot of the Nobel laureates, so those are the people we recognize as being the best in their fields, 95% of them also have some kind of active engagement in the arts. Whether it be music or writing or photography, they have something else that they're actively doing with their brains. And that is supporting them to be better scientists and technologists. So fast forward, we take all of this together, the experiences, the amazing, awesome things happening in space, the power of the arts. I wanted to really help people to solve some of these challenges that I was seeing, and I wanted to do something, my little bit, to help us all come together and solve these problems. And so I had the opportunity as a scientist more than 10 years ago to create something called the Humans in Space Art Program. And from that, I was able to then later open a nonprofit called SciArt Exchange. And the idea is to inspire everyone about the future of space exploration and the fact that everyone who is interested can have a role in that future, and that future is going to impact us here on Earth. And to help prepare and bring together everyone to solve those grand challenges ahead. So since it was built on this early program called the Humans in Space Art Program, I need to tell you a little bit about what that program was. So that started with children, but then later involved early career professionals and professional artists and scientists and engineers, and encouraged them to learn something about space exploration and then relay their ideas, their vision, their thoughts about that, their feelings about that through writing a poem or creating a symphony or a film or a beautiful work of visual art. And then in return, we didn't just touch the lives of those who created the artwork. We then went the extra mile to weave all of that multimedia artwork into displays and live performances around the world, so that now that artwork is telling the story of the future of space exploration through multimedia, multi-sensory, to touch the lives of anyone who is listening and viewing that artwork, to kind of start this snowball down the hill effect to get everybody inspired and engaged in space. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples from visual art of some of the stories that can be told through the arts, probably better than, just, other forms of communication. These are just a few examples of artworks from children. And you can see that the message in the first artwork is that we have a sort of a basic human need to explore. We are explorers, whether we're exploring our planet or beyond. It is our need to explore, and that it is going to take tremendous creativity in order to continue to explore. And that one of the main reasons that we go is to think, is there life out there besides ourselves? And it's not looking very promising at the moment, but we need to explore. And then the potential to live and work and do science and establish cities and bases and continue on further and further into the solar system is another very important reason that we are exploring space. But never forgetting where we came from and the benefits of what we give back to our own planet to help preserve our planet. We also, as I mentioned, collect artwork from adults. So here are a couple of examples from something called the Project Mars competition. And again, this is just visual art. This was also a film competition. And if there's 5 minutes at the end of this talk, I'll show you one of the top winning films. But again, this underscoring that we are explorers. Mars is in our DNA. And that we have to go beyond the moon, even further from our planet into the solar system. And that the next frontier, everyone, is Mars. So it's not just the moon, it's also Mars, but that there is so much we can get from this space exploration, including that hope of bringing all of us together as humanity to explore further into space. And we're doing it because we can, because we're humans, because we are creative, and because we have the capability. And this is the film that, if I have time, I will show you. It's called Rendezvous with Mars. And it's mind-boggling to think about living and working on another planetary surface and possibly even having children who may or may not ever really see the Earth. And to gain great perspectives and call Mars home sweet home, that would be something amazing. And maybe you go because you are excited about those job opportunities of creating an amazing ecosystem in space, or maybe you just want to take the ultimate selfie as a tourist. So there's so much that can be told through this artwork. And there are many forms of artwork. We are very fortunate as SciArt Exchange to be able to present even more of this artwork at Hani Artun. And some of the artwork takes many different formats, including comic strips. And again, this may be of interest to all of you. We worked with the NASA Earth Sciences group, and they're the ones who have the satellites that take pictures of the Earth and are then trying to understand, how they can solve local challenges, environmental challenges around the world. So we invited the world to tell, through comic strips, the stories of how observing the Earth helped people with their pollution, their wildfire problems, and their aquaculture problems. We have also been fortunate to use the things that we've learned about engaging the world and thinking about space exploration to help us during some of our most difficult times, including COVID. So shortly after COVID hit, we didn't have any funding, but we felt, we know how to do things online, and we know how to kind of engage people and connect them. What can we do? So we created a program, no funding, nothing, called Design Your Habitat, where we encouraged people to think about their real earthly habitat or their imagined earthly habitat and create multimedia about their perfect space, and to share that in social media around the world so that we would all feel connected through something together online. But we also took that opportunity to talk about the naturally isolated and confined conditions of space exploration and what the astronauts have learned by living and working in those isolated and confined conditions. And we interviewed space architects, astronauts, engineers, chefs, fashion designers, all different kinds of people who are working by bringing together science, technology, and the arts, and thinking about the impacts to space and how we can thrive in an isolated and confined environment. And also to create some curriculum that students could do at home if they wanted to. So this really underscored the message that we wanted to send. And, who could say it better than this line right here? We are all in this together. And the title of my talk promised that we're talking not only about exploring the solar system, but also about the universe. So I am pleased to tell you that one of our current projects, which will open in January, unfortunately, at the moment, it's going to be in Dallas, Texas, but we will also have an online presence, if anyone is interested, is SciArt Exchange is interested not in moving forward and deeper into what happens at the power of bringing science and technology together with the arts. And one of the problems that we're very interested in is large data. And how do you make larger and larger data sets interpretable by human beings? And we, as scientists and engineers, our gut reaction is always to make everything an XY plot, a histogram, a line, whatever it is. So we're interested in possibly the value of creating multi-sensory experiences of large data and whether that can help us to really understand the data better. So it's actually kind of a scientific experiment while also being an art experiment. So we are taking data from the James Webb Space Telescope, which is imaging, far, far beyond our solar system. And we are creating a physical installation that will not only show some of the visual interpretations of the data, but it's also going to sonify the data. So we're going to have sound and visual interpretations of the data, and it is going to be a physical installation where you go in there and you experience the data that we're collecting through space telescopes, because we can't see this with our naked eye. So we are creating the technology that allows us to collect these data, but we always ultimately have to interpret it as the human. So ask me in 6 months how that goes. It's very interesting bringing together the teams of scientists and artists and engineers and having discussions about, is this a science museum display or is this art? Because it's different depending on how you interpret it. And I will tell you the answer is it's art. So we'll see how it works out. It was already mentioned, we've been very fortunate as our team and our teams of volunteers have been very lucky to have some impact to this time. And we are always working to figure out how to have greater and greater impact. But what's really most important to me is the individual feedback that I get from people who felt that by having an opportunity given to them, someone earlier asked, how do you bring science and the arts together? You present an opportunity that allows that to happen and to have change happen. And also a really personally lovely moment is when a child who participated in one of our activities comes back 10 years later and says, "Dear Dr. Jancy, see how you changed everything." And that's a beautiful moment. So I would like to finish up and leave with a couple of ideas that I hope I have relayed to you. The first is that what's happening in space is tremendous right now. There are so many more opportunities through space agencies, different countries. It's not just NASA. And also space companies. And there is a role for just about everyone to contribute to that future. And it's a very, very exciting time. And I hope that I will have helped open your mind to that. What's more is what we're doing now in space will continue to be about surviving, but it also has to be about thriving as well. So there are a whole lot of new challenges for us to address. And I'll leave you with this final thought that we really need to do this together, that we can work together to solve the challenges in space, but also the ones on Earth. And I look forward to talking with some of you about those opportunities after the talk, and I can also answer any questions, or we can show a film about going to Mars. So thank you. So I don't know what time it is. Should we just show the film or should we address questions? Are there any questions immediately, either about human exploration, what happens to the humans in space, or the mind-boggling thoughts of bringing the arts together with space?
You mentioned the fact that one of the main goals of space exploration is potentially finding life on different planets. Is it at all a concern that maybe we bring life with us, like microorganisms and stuff, and contaminate the environments that we explore?
Excellent question, excellent point, and absolutely. We worry very much about, by accident, leaving some trace of life and then accidentally discovering that later and thinking that it is an indicator that there was life before us. And so there is an entire field of space exploration called planetary protection. And we talk a lot about what we need to do, what guidelines, what rules we need to put in place as we further explore. The challenge we have is that the space exploration is growing so fast that the guidelines are having trouble keeping up with that growth. But it is an extremely important field and something that many people are exploring and have been thinking about for a long time. But now that it's actually happening, we have to really, really pay attention to that. So that's excellent question. Oh.
Hi, I wanted to ask if there is any chance by researches and some that have been done to be easier for some like human disease that can be treated in Earth. Maybe is it easier for the different factors of the space to be treated there? Is there any chance of that be possible?
Also, very excellent question and point. There, as I mentioned, there are many hazards of spaceflight, and when they combine, it's really an extra challenge. So it is very stressful to be in the space environment, and also the fact that it's enclosed can lead to some of the challenges that you mentioned. We have even seen some evidence that viruses that normally are quiet in our bodies while we're on Earth under these stressful conditions can get somewhat reactivated. So we do worry about that. There's also a lot of research studying not just the human microbiology, but the microbiology inside of the spacecraft and how that's changing. You know, whether there are bacteria living on the walls, whether they're changing in the space environment. So you're absolutely right. It is something that we pay a lot of attention to and are trying to understand so that we can keep our eyes on things like that and consider that part of, you know, what might be some of the medical conditions that we have to prepare for.
Is there any chance like those human diseases that we see very commonly happening on Earth may be untreatable in the space?
So, also an interesting question. Things definitely change in space because of, you know, like for instance, you know, just kind of like the whole fluid shifting phenomenon and the stress and the radiation. We do see some differences. Even responses to, you know, common medicines that you might use on Earth might actually act a little different on you in space. So it is a challenge. We have not seen this problem, but we are definitely paying attention and keeping records of everything that we do see to anticipate any challenges. But we have not seen that yet.
Yes. Hi. Do you think AI and neurotechnology will enable us to digitize, augment, or upload human consciousness to traverse space in the future?
I didn't quite understand the question. I heard the word AI, but I didn't hear the rest of it.
Yeah, and neurotechnology will enable us to digitize, augment, or upload human consciousness.
Will AI allow us to digitize human consciousness?
Yeah,
Is that what you're
to be
asking?
able to traverse and go to space.
I don't know the answer to that.
Would you think it's possible, or do you think we should do it?
So we have lots of dinner time conversations about AI in my house because my older son is a computer programmer, and we have lots of these interesting what-ifs conversations. And so although I don't really know the ready answer to that, certainly AI has a lot of actually very helpful and hopeful opportunities, and we are definitely employing AI and machine learning technologies to try to create the support systems that we need. I don't know the answer to your question, because I think that's an amazing big question for life on Earth and not just life in space. I could pretend to know the answer, but that wouldn't be very decent of me, so.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your talk and for being here. We greatly appreciate that. Secondly, my question for you is, you mentioned earlier in your talk that there are only benefits for humanity on Earth from the space exploration program, and that are only negatives for humanity on space. What about humanity on Earth? And generally, what is the environmental cost of continuous and multiple space exploration programs?
But what is the environmental impact? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and how can we manage it? Because I think it's greatly affecting the climate change that we are witnessing.
So, I don't think space. Are you trying to? Are you saying how will what we do in space help us with our environmental challenges on Earth, or are you saying whether space is causing environmental challenges?
Mostly the second one.
Mostly the second one. Okay. Well, I think that there's a growing consciousness in general in our environment and preserving it. And just as there is just in commercial air travel, I think that everyone is trying to think about how can we minimize the impact to the Earth. At this time, I think all of the things, my personal opinion, because this is not my field specifically, I think my personal opinion is that what we are learning about the environment far outweighs the current impacts of the actual act of space exploration at this time. You know, what we're learning about energy systems, observing the Earth, how to live in these closed environments, how to have new ecosystems, new food systems. At this time, I still think the pros are outweighing the cons. But my colleague may be able to also answer that, because I think that's part of the topic of his talk.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, I wanted to ask if the geomagnetic field of Earth is actually weakening, and if it does,
what is weakening?
The geomagnetic field of Earth, and if it does, is it concerning about all the orbiting satellites and the expeditions and missions we want to?
So I presume you're asking about radiation.
Yes.
Okay.
And other things. I've read that if the geomagnetic field of Earth weakens, it will be difficult for the satellites and for future expeditions. But I don't know if that's true.
So I know mostly about, in that particular field, because remember my focus is humans, I know mostly about our need to harden our technology to be able to handle the expected radiation environment of any particular mission. And one of the things that I forgot to mention is the hazards to the technology or the human depends, of course, on what your mission is. Where exactly are you going? How long are you expecting to go there? And all of that. So the challenges in low Earth orbit are actually different from the challenges in the moon for some of the reasons that you just mentioned, is that it's a different radiation environment. There's actually less galactic cosmic radiation effect in the low Earth orbit. It's worse when we go to the moon and Mars because we're not protected by some of our natural protective systems. So I can't answer that question more. Again, perhaps my colleague can. He is the one who thinks more about the technologies. But I do know that enough to know that radiation is a challenge not just to the human, but also to the technologies that we're using. Yes.
You mentioned that radiation is a major concern to people living outside the Earth. And my question is, how can you protect people living on planets such as Mars and other bodies such as the Moon in the future missions that NASA plans to follow?
So the good things about being on the planet, a planetary surface, is that you're already partially shielded from this bath of galactic cosmic radiation. We're more worried about transporting the human from one planetary, from Earth to, ultimately to Mars. There's less shielding possible under those conditions. So that being on the planet is already helpful. And one of the things that we need to do is to better understand the biological effects of this galactic cosmic radiation. It has a different profile, different energy deposit, an ionization profile. So we're going to start by understanding that so that we can anticipate what the challenge is and whether we need to shield and with what. Because that is part of the problem with the galactic cosmic radiation. It's not as easy to shield. So some of the things that we do to protect ourselves on Earth are going to be harder on these long-term missions, but the planet itself is not where we worry the most. It's the journey in between.
Okay, thank you. Well, I didn't quite I didn't quite catch this. Well, in one of the bullets in one of the slides, you mentioned the socio-political grand scheme of things. How does the space exploration exactly affect that?
So part of it is just bringing people together to explore further into space. So it is the collaborative opportunities. But one of the things that I did not discuss here is all of the incredible questions that we have to answer. So I have been in rooms where we have talked about who owns the moon and what will the societies be, what monetary currency will we have. I have even been thinking about how will we handle, for instance, there are a lot of artists who are very eager to send their artwork into space, to have a flying artwork, or to have it land on the surface of the moon. Well, there's a conflict in my mind between the scientist side and the artist side of me. I want to encourage the artists to create artwork to go to the moon and land on the moon. But in my mind, I'm also worried about what this person brought up, which is you're kind of polluting the surface of the moon. And if we want to use the surface of the moon to study and better understand the evolution of our solar system, I want you to keep your art away from the part that I'm trying to do science on. So there are a lot of questions about and that's just tiny little surface questions. So many ethical and cultural questions.
Well, I'm asking you that because during the past decades, we've seen some conflicts of the countries, for example, USA and USSR, sorry. So is this still occurring or are the things more peaceful now?
So one of the things that is most hopeful about space is the potential to actually bring us together. You know that the International Space Station has Russian collaboration, and that is an area where we are still steady and continuing to collaborate and work together. So it is up to all of us and the role that we play in that future to use it in the most beneficial way possible. And that is just one example.
Okay, thank you.
Should we? So should we answer more questions or show a 4-minute film? What's that?
You can proceed with your video.
Okay, it's not a requirement, but how about one more question and then we'll take a film. I leave it to someone else to decide whose hand went up first. And I will. I'm listening. I'm just trying to find the film. There we go.
Yes.
Was there a question?
Yes, here.
Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Hello.
You did talk about the project Hera, which includes people going to Mars, correct?
Yep.
Is there any researches or any estimation about when people will actually be able to live in Mars, like in how many years, perhaps?
Decades.
Decades. Okay.
Yes. Earlier, my colleague was asked, when are we going to the moon next? And that date's already slipping. So it's going to be decades. But I'm confident it's going to happen, especially if we work together on it. But the Hera mission, which is the one you're referring to, is a simulation focused mostly on the challenges to behavioral and team health. That we also have simulations that try to simulate gravity by keeping people in bed for weeks and months with their feet higher than their heads. It's called bed rest, but it makes the fluid rush to the head. And then we do simulations on the sort of like the full body effects. And all of this is in preparation of trying to understand and anticipate as much as we can. So when the technology is ready, we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. One more question, please, if possible.
Oh.
Yes.
That's 2 questions.
Yes. Sorry. If possible, in how many years maybe we will be able to maybe restore the ecosystem of Mars? It's very far away from.
Ask him that question. That is actually very much going to be the focus of his talk. So save that.
Okay.
All right. Do we really want to take the time, or I don't have to? Okay. So I just give you a tiny bit of background. We'll leave you on a high note. It's always good to have multimedia. So this is a 4.5-minute film that was the winning film from a competition we had called the Project Mars competition. It was for posters and films from adults. This particular film was created by some students from New York University and India. And it will underscore some of the messages that I am hoping to leave you with, which is to think about what inspires a person about space, to nurture that inspiration as family and friends, and to work collaboratively to be those first people that will, in person, see the planet Mars together. And we'll see how loud it is. So I hope you enjoy it, and I am also very happy to answer more questions later in the morning after my colleague speaks. You stopped? But I want to do full screen. The music gets really loud.
Repeat? सकुचाये मन इठले धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो मन धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो मन धीर धरो काहे सकुचाये मन इठले धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो मन धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो मन धीर धरो अपना रास्ता देख लिया जब खुद से चलना सीख लिया मन धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो अपना रास्ता देख लिया जब खुद से चलना सीख लिया मन धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो काहे सकुचाये मन इतने धीर धरो तुम धीर धरो मन 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 धीर धरो एक जाए एक जाए एक जाए एक जाए एक जाए काहे सकुचाये मन इठले दी
So I encourage you to imagine Mars and help enable the future in space and on Earth through inspiration, education, and lots of hard, passionate work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. McPhee, for your very interesting presentation. Thank you very much.